The laughter hit her before the dust settled from the convoy. Private First Class Yara Okonkwo stood at the entrance of FOB Resolute with her rifle case over one shoulder and a rucksack that weighed more than she did, watching a group of Navy SEALs stop their conversation to stare at her like she was a lost tourist. Senior Chief Petty Officer Decker Holt's voice carried across the gravel loud enough for everyone within 100 meters to hear. "Tell me that's not our attachment." The laughter that followed was sharp and practiced, the kind of sound men make when they have already decided someone does not belong. What none of them knew, what they could not see in her young face and slight frame, was that Yara Okonkwo had learned to shoot before she learned to ride a bicycle, and the rifle in that case had taken lives at distances these men had only read about in training manuals. Before we continue, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. Maybe you have known someone who was underestimated like this, someone others dismissed until they proved everyone wrong. She walked toward them anyway. 18 years old, 5'4", 120 pounds with her boots on. The SEALs parted like she carried a disease, their smirks tracking her movement across the compound. Holt stepped directly into her path, arms crossed over a chest that could have been carved from the same mountains surrounding the base. "You got paperwork?" he asked, though it was not really a question. Yara pulled the transfer orders from her cargo pocket and held them out. Her hand did not shake. Her voice did not waver. Private First Class Okonkwo reporting for attachment duty. Holt made a show of reading the orders, his eyebrows climbing higher with each line. Sniper qualified. He looked at the men behind him. They got 18-year-old girls shooting sniper qualified now. He turned back to her. "What, you in some kind of junior marksmanship contest back home?" The other SEALs laughed again. A petty officer first class with a Reaper tattoo on his forearm whispered something that made the men beside him choke on their amusement. Yara stood motionless, absorbing every sound, cataloging every face. Her grandfather had taught her this. When they want you to react, you observe. When they want you to break, you learn. Sergeant First Class Nina Castellan appeared from the operations building, her army uniform crisp despite the Afghan heat. She inserted herself between Yara and the SEALs with the practiced ease of someone who had done this before. "Senior Chief, I see you have met our new attachment." Holt handed the orders back without looking at Yara. "Attachment, that's what we are calling it now." He gestured to his team. "We are running combat operations in 72 hours. Real operations. The kind where people die if someone freezes up. And command send me a kid who should be at prom." She qualified highest in her training cycle, Castellan said evenly. "So did my nephew at summer camp." Holt turned and walked away. His men followed, their laughter fading but not disappearing. "Keep her out of our way, Sergeant. Last thing we need is a body bag because some teenager wanted to play soldier." The compound fell quiet. Castellan put a hand on Yara's shoulder, brief and professional. "Do not let them get to you. They do this to everyone." Yara nodded but said nothing. She had expected this. Her grandfather had warned her. The ones who talk loudest usually shoot worst. Remember that when they try to break you down. Castellan led her toward the small army section of the base, past motor pools and communications tents, and men who stared without the hostility of the SEALs but with the same skepticism. An 18-year-old girl in a combat zone. The question was written on every face. What's she doing here? The barracks were sparse. A cot, a footlocker, a small desk bolted to the plywood floor. Yara set down her rifle case first, handling it with more care than her other belongings. The case was worn at the corners, older than she was, and the names stenciled on the side had faded to ghosts of letters. She unpacked methodically, clothes folded tight, cleaning kit positioned for easy access. And then, from the very bottom of her rucksack, a notebook. The cover was leather, cracked with age, filled with pages of calculations and diagrams in handwriting that was not her own. She placed it on the desk beside a photograph of an elderly man in marine dress blues, his chest heavy with medals, his eyes carrying the same steadiness that lived in hers. Outside, the Afghan sun began its descent toward the mountains. Yara could hear the SEALs in their compound across the base, their voices carrying in the thin air. Someone mentioned her name followed by words she chose not to process. She had 2 weeks to change their minds. 2 weeks to prove that she belonged here. 2 weeks to honor the man in the photograph who had believed in her when no one else did. She opened the notebook to the first page. The handwriting was careful, precise. The words were addressed to her. If you're reading this, I am gone. But you are exactly where you need to be. What I taught you is not about killing. It is about protecting. The distance between you and a target is the same distance between your people and harm. Never forget which side of that equation matters. Yara closed the notebook as footsteps approached outside. Through the small window, she watched Lieutenant Commander Elias Thorne walking past her barracks, his gaze lingering on her door for a moment longer than necessary. His expression was unreadable, but something in his eyes looked almost like recognition. She had never seen him before in her life. That night, alone in her bunk, Yara heard Holt's voice drifting across the base. 2 weeks. We babysit the kid for 2 weeks, then she is someone else's problem. She turned to a specific page in the notebook, studying a calculation her grandfather had written 20 years before she was born. A confirmed hit at a distance most marksmen would call impossible. Her finger traced the number. Then she allowed herself a small smile that nobody would ever see. The first full day began with exclusion. Yara arrived at the training area at 0500, an hour before the scheduled start, and found the SEALs already running drills they had not told her about. Holt stood at the center of the formation, calling out movements with the precision of a man who had done this 10,000 times. When he saw her approach, he did not stop. He did not acknowledge her presence at all. She stood at the edge of the training ground for 40 minutes, watching, learning. The SEALs moved through close quarters combat sequences, transitioning between rifle and pistol with fluid efficiency. Petty Officer First Class Marcus Vance, the one with the Reaper tattoo, served as Holt's partner. Their coordination was seamless, built from years of operating together in places that did not appear on official maps. When the drills finally ended, Holt walked past her like she was a fence post. The rest of the team followed his lead. Only Vance glanced in her direction, and even that was brief, dismissive, the kind of look a man gives something he has already decided is irrelevant. Yara spent the morning on assigned tasks that had nothing to do with her training. Inventory counts, equipment inspections, the kind of work usually given to soldiers being punished. She completed each task without complaint, her movements efficient, her face revealing nothing. Between assignments, she found moments to observe the wind patterns moving across the base. The flags near the command building, the dust kicked up by passing vehicles, the way the air shifted when it came down from the mountains versus when it swept across the valley floor. At noon, she sat alone in the mess hall. The SEALs occupied their usual table, their conversation loud enough to carry. Holt was telling a story, gesturing with his fork. Last attachment we had, he said, was some Army Ranger who thought he knew everything. 3 weeks in country, first real contact, and he freezes. Just stands there while rounds are cracking past his head. Vance had to drag him behind cover. He shook his head. Cost us 2 weeks of operational tempo, and damn near cost Vance's life. The table went quiet for a moment. Vance stared at his food. That is why I do not trust attachments, Holt continued. Do not care what their paperwork says. Do not care what they did in training. Until I see someone perform under fire, they're a liability. He did not look at Yara, but everyone knew who he was talking about. And this one, 18 years old, probably never even seen a dead body outside a funeral home. The laughter returned, but it was thinner now. Some of the men glanced toward Yara's table. She continued eating, her expression unchanged, though she filed away every word. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory. They will tell you who they are if you listen. Most people are too busy defending themselves to hear it. That afternoon, Castellan found her cleaning her rifle behind the army barracks. The sergeant sat down on an empty crate, watching Yara's hands move through the familiar motions. You do not have to take their abuse, Castellan said quietly. I can talk to Thorne, get you reassigned to a different unit. Yara did not look up from her work. With respect, Sergeant, I did not come here to be comfortable. I came here to do a job. Castellan studied her for a long moment. You remind me of someone. The way you carry yourself. Like you have already decided what you're going to prove, and you're just waiting for everyone else to catch up. My grandfather, Yara said. He was like that. Military? Marine Scout Sniper. Vietnam. 2 tours. Castellan nodded slowly. That explains some things. She stood, brushing dust from her uniform. Qualification shoot is tomorrow. Range goes out to 1,200 meters. She paused. Holt's record is 1,147. Been standing for 3 years. Nobody on the team has touched it. Yara's hands stopped moving for just a moment. Then she resumed cleaning, her rhythm unchanged. Good to know. That night, Yara climbed to the roof of the army barracks. The Afghan sky spread above her like a map of everything she had ever wanted to reach. She opened her grandfather's notebook, studying calculations by the light of distant stars. Wind drift at extended ranges. Bullet drop at various elevations. The mathematics of sending death across distances that most people could not even see clearly. Footsteps on the ladder behind her. She closed the notebook, but did not hide it. Lieutenant Commander Thorne pulled himself onto the roof, moving with the quiet efficiency of a man who had spent decades learning how not to be heard. He stood at the edge, looking out at the mountains, apparently ignoring her presence. "They say you do not talk much," he said finally. "Not much to say," Yara replied. Thorne was quiet for a while. When he spoke again, his voice was different, softer. "Theodore Okonkwo. That name mean anything to you?" Yara's breath caught. She forced herself to stay still. "He was my grandfather." Thorne nodded, still looking at the mountains. "I thought so. You have his eyes." He turned to face her, and in the starlight, she could see something that might have been respect, or might have been grief. "I'm interested to see what else you inherited from him." He descended the ladder without another word, leaving Yara alone with questions that multiplied in the darkness. She did not sleep that night. Instead, she sat with the notebook open to a page marked with a faded photograph. Her grandfather, young and fierce, standing beside a rifle that looked exactly like the one in her case. Below the photograph, a single entry. Confirmed hit. 1,340 meters. The date was 1969. The location was a valley in Vietnam that no longer existed on any map. The next morning, the qualification shoot would begin. The SEALs would line up with their expensive rifles and their years of experience. They would shoot at targets they considered challenging, and they would measure themselves against Holt's record like it was the ceiling of what was possible. Yara looked at her grandfather's number one more time. 1,340 meters. With equipment from 50 years ago, in conditions that would make these Afghan mountains look like a shooting range. She closed the notebook and began preparing her rifle. Tomorrow, the SEALs would learn that Holt's record was not a ceiling. It was barely a floor. The qualification range stretched toward the mountains like a challenge. Targets stood at measured intervals, growing smaller with distance until the farthest ones were barely visible to the naked eye. 800 meters, 1,000 meters, 1,100, 1,200. Metal silhouettes waiting to be struck by men who had trained their entire adult lives for this single skill. Yara arrived early again. She found a position at the edge of the firing line and began studying the wind. The flags at the range markers told part of the story. The dust moving across the valley told another. The way the morning air sat heavy before the sun heated the rocks told the rest. She calculated adjustments in her head, running through her grandfather's formulas like prayers. The SEALs arrived as a group, carrying their rifles with the casual confidence of men who knew they were the best. Holt set up at the center of the line, his position a statement of dominance. Vance took the spot beside him, unpacking a spotting scope with practiced hands. The other operators filled in around them, leaving Yara isolated at the far end like an afterthought. Holt addressed the line without looking at her. Standard qualification. 5 rounds at each distance. 800 to 1,200 meters. He paused to let the weight of the numbers settle. Current record is 1,147. He did not say whose record it was. He did not need to. The betting started immediately. Whispered wagers passed between the SEALs about who would come closest to Holt's mark. Someone mentioned Yara's name, and the response was muffled laughter. $20 says she cannot hit anything past 600. The voice belonged to a SEAL she had not learned the name of yet. Another voice countered. 20 says she does not even know how to zero that antique she is carrying. Yara said nothing. She laid prone behind her rifle, settling into the position her grandfather had taught her before she was old enough for school. The weapon was old, yes, a model that belonged in a museum according to modern standards, but had been maintained with religious devotion, its barrel true, its action smooth from decades of careful use. It had killed enemies of the United States in jungles and deserts and mountains across 3 continents. It did not care about the men laughing at its age. Holt shot first. His rifle cracked 5 times at each distance, the reports echoing off the mountains like controlled thunder. 800 meters, 5 hits. 1,000 meters, 5 hits. 1,100 meters, 4 hits. The 5th round caught the edge of the target, enough to count, but not clean. At 1,200 meters, he landed 3. His final qualifying shot sailed just over the 1,147-meter target, confirming his record but not extending it. The SEALs applauded. Holt stood and stretched, satisfaction evident in every movement. He gestured for the next shooter to take the line, beginning a rotation that would work through the entire team before reaching Yara. She watched each man shoot, studied their techniques, their breathing patterns, the way they adjusted for wind. The best of them reached 1,000 meters consistently. A few touched 1,100. None approached Holt's mark. The gap between the senior chief and his men was real and earned. Where her turn finally came, the sun had shifted position. The wind had changed. Conditions that favored the morning shooters had evolved into something more challenging. Yara took her place on the line and heard someone mutter that at least the weather would give her an excuse. She ignored them all. 800 meters. She took her time with the first shot, feeling the rifle's weight, reacquainting herself with its personality. The round struck center mass. The 2nd through 5th followed in the same hole, a grouping tight enough to cover with a coin. Silence replaced the whispers behind her. 1,000 meters. The wind pushed from the east now, requiring adjustment. Yara dialed her scope, made a calculation that existed nowhere in standard training manuals, and fired. 5 shots. 5 hits. The grouping wider than before, but still within a space smaller than a dinner plate. 1,100 meters. This was where most shooters start to struggle, where the variables multiplied and the margins for error shrank to nearly nothing. Yara felt her grandfather's hand on her shoulder, a ghost of memory guiding her breathing. She fired 5 times. 5 metal silhouettes rang with impact. The SEALs had stopped talking entirely. 1,147 meters. Holt's record distance. The target was a speck against the mountain backdrop, visible only through magnification. Yara settled her crosshairs, read the wind one final time, and squeezed the trigger. The ping of impact reached them a full second after the shot. Then another, and another. 5 rounds. 5 hits. Yara did not celebrate. She did not even lift her head from the rifle. Instead, she dialed her scope again, adjusting for a distance she had not been asked to shoot. 1,203 meters. A target that existed at the range, but had never been part of standard qualification. A distance 56 meters beyond what Holt had ever achieved in competition. She fired once. The ping that echoed back was the loudest sound Yara had ever heard. She stood slowly, collecting her brass with the same methodical calm she brought to everything. When she turned, she found a wall of faces caught between disbelief and something that looked almost like fear. Holt's expression had transformed from smugness to stone, his jaw tight, his eyes calculating. "Lucky shot," he said finally. Wind shifted in her favor. Vance looked at his spotter scope, then at Holt, then back at Yara. His voice was quiet. Wind was against her, senior chief. She shot into a headwind. Holt said nothing. He turned and walked off the range without another word. The SEALs parted to let him pass, then followed in uncomfortable silence. Only Vance remained, still looking at Yara with an expression she could not quite read. Something had shifted behind his eyes. Not respect, not yet, but the beginning of doubt. The first crack in a wall that had seemed unbreakable. That night, Yara returned to her barracks to find her bunk ransacked. Clothes scattered, footlocker overturned. Her grandfather's notebook lay open on the floor, pages bent but not torn. A message delivered without words. She picked up the notebook carefully, smoothing the pages, checking for damage. Behind her, a shadow filled the doorway. Records do not mean anything out here. Holt's voice was cold. When round are coming back at you, when your spotter is bleeding out, when the only thing between your brothers and a body bag is your trigger finger. He stepped closer. That is when we find out what someone is made of. And I already know what you are made of. He left without waiting for a response. Yara sat on her bunk, hands steady despite everything, and began cleaning her rifle. The record was hers now, but she understood that she had not won anything today. She had only made an enemy. The days following the qualification shoot brought a different kind of hostility. The mockery had been uncomfortable but survivable. What replaced it was worse. Silence. The SEALs stopped acknowledging Yara entirely, moving around her like she was furniture, speaking over her like she was not in the room. Holt had given an order without saying a word, and his men had obeyed. Vance was the exception, though barely. He did not speak to her directly, but he no longer looked away when their eyes met. Something was working behind his expression, a question he had not yet decided to ask. Yara noticed and filed it away. Allies could come from unexpected places. Her grandfather had taught her that too. On the fourth morning, Castellan pulled Yara aside after breakfast. There is something you should know about why Holt is the way he is. They walked to a quiet corner of the base where the mountains blocked the wind. Castellan spoke without looking at her, her voice flat with the weight of information she had carried too long. 8 months ago, Holt's team took an attachment on a priority target mission. Army Ranger, 6 years experience, spotless record. Everyone thought he was solid. Castellan paused. Contact happened faster than anyone expected. Enemy fire from 3 directions. The attachment was on Overwatch, had a clear line on the primary threat. He froze, just stopped functioning. Sat there while rounds tore through the position below him. Yara waited. Vance took 2 rounds pulling him to cover. Almost bled out before the medevac arrived. Castellan finally met her eyes. Holt has not trusted anyone outside his team since. Especially attachments. Especially ones who look like they have never seen combat. Yara absorbed this quietly. It explained things. It did not excuse them, but it explained them. Fear wearing the mask of cruelty. Protection twisted into prejudice. She understood now what she was really fighting against. That afternoon, the mission briefing changed everything. The operations room was standing room only. Maps covered every wall, satellite imagery spread across the central table. Lieutenant Commander Thorne stood at the front, his presence commanding attention without demanding it. The SEALs filled the seats. Yara stood at the back, close enough to see, but positioned to be forgotten. Karangal Valley, Thorne began. Intelligence has confirmed enemy sniper teams operating in the eastern ridgelines. 3 coalition patrols hit in the past month. Confirmed casualties. He tapped the map. Our mission is to establish Overwatch positions and neutralize the threat. 48-hour operation. Insertion by ground convoy. Extraction by helicopter. Holt leaned forward. Was the engagement range assessment? Thorne glanced at a file in front of him. Enemy snipers have been engaging at distances between 800 and 1,400 meters. Elevation advantage on their side. They know the terrain better than we do. The room shifted uncomfortably. Those were significant numbers. Professional numbers. This was not going to be a simple operation. Thorne continued outlining the tactical approach, assigning positions and responsibilities. When he reached the sniper assignments, Holt interrupted. I want Vance on primary Overwatch with me. Secondary position goes to Kimura and Torres. Thorne nodded slowly. In private first-class Okonkwo will take tertiary Overwatch on the eastern approach. The room went still. Holt's face darkened. Commander, with respect, she has not been in combat. She has not been tested. Putting her in an independent overwatch position is putting the entire team at risk. Thorne's expression did not change. She qualified highest at the range this week. Higher than you, Senior Chief. Higher than anyone on this base in 3 years. That was a controlled environment. Holt's voice rose. Paper targets do not shoot back. She is 18 years old. She is a liability. She goes. Thorne's tone left no room for argument. That is final. The briefing continued, but the tension never dissipated. Holt's jaw remained clenched, his eyes burning holes in the map in front of him. When the room finally emptied, Yara stayed behind, studying the terrain imagery with the focus of someone memorizing sacred text. Thorne approached her after the others had gone. He set a file on the table in front of her, his movements deliberate. You should know what we are walking into. The intelligence report was thorough. Enemy sniper teams with confirmed kills. Estimated skill level based on shot distances and target selection. Tactical analysis suggesting at least one shooter with formal military training. This was not going to be a fight against amateurs. Your grandfather would have called this target rich. Thorne's voice was quiet, almost gentle. Yara looked up sharply. The question she had been holding since the rooftop finally broke free. How did you know him? Thorne was silent for a long moment. The operations room felt suddenly smaller, the weight of decades pressing down on both of them. Theodore Okonkwo, he said finally. Staff Sergeant, 1st Marine Scout Sniper to make a confirmed kill over 1,200 meters in Vietnam. He paused. He was my instructor when I was younger than you are now. 23 years old, fresh out of BUD/S, thought I knew everything. He showed me how much I still had to learn. Yara's throat tightened. She had heard stories about her grandfather training other snipers, but never names. Never faces. He wrote me a letter once. 20 years ago, right after you were born. Thorne's eyes carried something that looked like old grief. Asked me to keep an eye out for someone. Said he was raising his replacement, and someday she would need a chance to prove what she could do. The words hung in the air between them. Yara thought about all the nights her grandfather had spent teaching her to shoot, to calculate, to think. She had always believed it was because he wanted to share his passion. Now, she understood it had been something more deliberate. A legacy being transferred. A mission being passed down. Thorne tapped the intelligence file. Get some sleep, Private. You're going to need it. He walked away, leaving Yara alone with the maps and the weight of understanding. Her grandfather had known she would end up here, had planned for it, had reached across time to give her exactly what Holt was trying to take away. A chance. She studied the terrain until her eyes burned, memorizing every ridgeline, every shadow, every place an enemy might hide. In 48 hours, she would walk into a valley full of men who wanted to kill her, and she would show them all what Theodore Okonkwo had built. The morning of mission prep broke gray and cold. Yara had not slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the terrain maps, the ridgelines, the places where death could hide and wait. Her grandfather's voice filled the silence between her thoughts. Exhaustion is the enemy of precision. Rest when you can. Fight when you must. She had not been able to follow that advice. The equipment staging area buzzed with controlled chaos. SEALs checked weapons and communications gear, loaded magazines, tested night vision equipment. Yara moved through her own preparations at the edge of the activity, invisible by design. She inspected her rifle for the 3rd time, verified her ammunition count, adjusted the straps on her pack until they sat exactly right. Holt's voice cut through the noise. Everyone form up. Final equipment check. The team assembled in a loose formation. Holt walked the line, inspecting each operator's gear with the thoroughness of a man who understood that small mistakes cost lives. When he reached Yara, he stopped. Magazine pouches, he said flatly. Yara presented them for inspection. Holt examined each one, his fingers probing for defects that did not exist. He moved to her rifle, running his hands along the stock, checking the scope mounts, testing the action. His jaw tightened when he found nothing wrong. Then he looked at her pack. Open it. Yara complied. Holt removed items one by one, examining them with exaggerated care. Water bladder, first aid kit, emergency rations, ammunition, notebook, He held up the worn leather journal, turning it over in his hands like evidence at a trial. "What is this?" "Personal item," Yara replied, her voice steady. "Personal items do not belong on combat operations." Holt's tone carried the satisfaction of a man who had finally found what he was looking for. "They create clutter, distraction." He looked at the assembled team. "This is exactly what I mean. She is not ready. She is bringing a diary to a gunfight." Laughter rippled through some of the SEALs. Others remained silent, watching. Vance studied the ground at his feet. Yara reached out and took the notebook from Holt's hands. Her movement was calm, deliberate. Not a diary, Senior Chief. Ballistic calculations. Range data. Wind tables. She met his eyes without blinking. "My grandfather compiled this over 30 years of combat deployments. Every shot he ever took. Every lesson he ever learned. It has saved more lives than most weapons in this armory." Holt's expression flickered. Before he could respond, Thorne appeared beside them. "Is there a problem here?" "No, sir." Holt stepped back, just ensuring the attachment is properly equipped. Thorne looked at the notebook in Yara's hands, then at Holt. "She is properly equipped. Continue the inspection." The moment passed, but the damage lingered. Yara repacked her gear with hands that wanted to shake but refused. She would not give them the satisfaction. An hour later, Castellan found her behind the motor pool, sitting against a concrete barrier with her eyes closed. The sergeant sat down beside her without speaking. Sometimes silence was the only comfort worth offering. Finally, Castellan broke it. "Mail came this morning." She held out a letter, worn from its journey across oceans and continents. Yara recognized her mother's handwriting immediately. She opened the envelope carefully, unfolding the single page inside. The words blurred as she read. Her mother wrote about small things. The weather back home, the cattle, the neighbors who still asked about her. And then, near the bottom, the words that hit like bullets. "Tomorrow is the anniversary. 2 years since your grandfather passed. I visited his grave this morning, told him you were doing exactly what he always knew you would. He would be so proud, baby girl. So proud." Yara folded the letter and pressed it against her chest. 2 years. It felt like yesterday. It felt like forever. She remembered holding his hand in the hospital, listening to his breathing slow, watching the light leave eyes that had seen so much death and somehow remained kind. "He made me promise," she said quietly. Castellan waited. "He made me promise I would not waste what he taught me, that I would use it to protect people." She looked at the mountains rising beyond the base. "I'm not here to prove anything to Holt. I'm not here to break records or earn respect. I am here because my grandfather spent 18 years preparing me for exactly this moment, and I will not let him down." Castellan put a hand on her shoulder. "Then go show them what he built." The convoy departed at 0400. Darkness wrapped around the vehicles like a blanket, headlights cutting pale tunnels through the Afghan night. Yara sat in the back of the third vehicle, rifle across her knees, surrounded by SEALs who still would not meet her eyes. Holt's voice crackled over the radio from the lead vehicle. "All call signs, weapons free upon contact. And someone keep eyes on our attachment. Last thing we need is friendly fire from a nervous kid." The mountains rose around them like walls closing in. Somewhere ahead, enemy fighters waited in positions they had held for years. Snipers who knew every rock, every shadow, every angle of approach. Men who had killed Americans before and would try to kill them again. Yara touched her pocket where her grandfather's photograph rested against her heart. The notebook sat in her pack, 30 years of wisdom waiting to be applied. Her rifle lay ready across her legs, cleaned and loaded with rounds she had inspected individually. 7 hours until they reached the operational area. 7 hours of darkness and doubt and the weight of everything she carried. The SEALs around her checked their weapons, spoke in low voices, prepared themselves for what was coming. None of them spoke to her. That was fine. Yara did not need their words. She needed their survival. And when the sun rose over the Korangal Valley, she would give them exactly that, whether they wanted it or not. The Korangal Valley opened before them like a wound in the earth. Steep ridgelines rose on either side, scarred with rocks and sparse vegetation that offered 1,000 places to hide. The convoy stopped at the designated staging point as the first light of dawn touched the eastern peaks. Yara stepped out of the vehicle and immediately began reading the terrain the way her grandfather had taught her. Every shadow, every angle, every place where a patient man with a rifle could wait for hours without moving. Holt gathered the team in a tight perimeter. Overwatch positions established in 30 minutes. Vance, you are with me on the northern ridge. Kimura, Torres, take the southern approach. He paused, his eyes finding Yara with obvious reluctance. Okonkwo, eastern overlook. You see anything, you report. You do not engage without authorization. Clear? Clear, Yara replied. The climb to her position took 20 minutes of careful movement through terrain that wanted to break ankles and announce presence. She reached the overlook and settled into a natural depression between two boulders, her rifle already sweeping the valley below. The position was good. Clear sight lines across the primary approach. Elevation advantage. Multiple exit routes if things went wrong. She keyed her radio. Overwatch 3 established. Eastern approach covered. Copy, Overwatch 3. Thorne's voice was calm. All positions report status. The team checked in one by one. Holt and Vance on the northern ridge. Kimura and Torres to the south. The main element holding in the valley floor, preparing to move toward the village where intelligence suggested enemy fighters had been operating. For 2 hours, nothing happened. The sun climbed higher, burning away the morning cool. Yara stayed motionless behind her scope, scanning in slow patterns, fighting the fatigue that pulled at her edges. Her grandfather's voice filled the waiting. Patience is not passive. It is the most active form of hunting. You are not waiting for something to happen. You are waiting for exactly the right moment to make it happen. Movement caught her eye at the edge of her scope. Southeast ridgeline, 1,100 meters out. A shape that did not belong to the rocks. She adjusted magnification and felt her breath catch. 3 figures moving between boulders. Careful, deliberate. The lead man carried a rifle with a long barrel and a scope that caught the sunlight for just a moment before he moved back into shadow. Overwatch 3 to all call signs. She kept her voice flat despite the adrenaline flooding her system. 3 enemy fighters, southeast ridge. Grid reference follows. Possible sniper team. They're moving toward elevated position, overlooking the valley floor. Copy, Overwatch 3. Thorne's response was immediate. All call signs hold position. Maintain observation. Yara tracked the fighters as they climbed. They were good. Professional. They moved in patterns designed to minimize exposure, using terrain like men who had grown up in these mountains. In 4 minutes, they would reach a rock formation that would give them a clear line of fire on the main element below. And on Vance's position, Overwatch 3 to Overwatch 1. She calculated distances rapidly. Vance, you need to move. Their target position has direct line of sight on your location. Static. Then Holt's voice, dismissive. Negative, Overwatch 3. We have cover here. Stay in your lane. Yara watched the enemy sniper team settle into position. The lead fighter extended a bipod, adjusting his rifle with practiced efficiency. His spotter raised binoculars, scanning the valley. In seconds, they would see Vance's position. The morning light was hitting the northern ridge at exactly the wrong angle, and something metallic was reflecting from where the SEALs had set up. Overwatch 1, you have a reflection. They are going to see you. I said stay in your lane. Holt's voice was sharp. We have been doing this longer than you have been alive. The enemy spotter stopped moving. His binoculars locked on a specific point. He turned to the sniper beside him and pointed. Yara did not wait for authorization. Vance, move now. She fired. The round crossed 940 meters in just over a second. The enemy spotter dropped before he could complete his warning. His partner spun toward the sound, trying to locate the threat, and Yara's second shot took him through the chest. The third fighter broke from cover, running for a better position, and her third round caught him mid-stride. 3 shots, 3 kills. Less than 4 seconds. The valley erupted. Gunfire crackled from multiple positions as enemy fighters who had been waiting in concealment opened up on the American positions. The main element took cover, returning fire. Tracers cut bright lines through the morning air. Yara kept shooting. A fighter with an RPG rising from behind a wall. 900 meters. Down. Another moving between buildings in the village. 850 meters. Down. A machine gun team setting up on a rooftop. 1,000 meters. 2 shots. Both down. The radio exploded with voices. Contact north. Contact south. Overwatch 3. Confirm your kills. 6 confirmed. Yara responded, already scanning for the next threat. Continuing engagement. The firefight lasted 18 minutes. When the last echo faded and the enemy survivors melted back into the mountains, Yara had fired 14 rounds. 11 confirmed kills. Ranges between 800 and 1,100 meters. Under combat conditions. Under fire. With bullets cracking past her position from fighters who had finally located her. She stayed in position until Thorne called the all clear. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was controlled. The shaking would come later, she knew. When she was alone. When she had time to process what she had done. But not now. Now, she was exactly what her grandfather had built her to be. Vance found her during the consolidation. He stood at the edge of her position, looking at her with an expression she had never seen from any of the SEALs. That first call, he said quietly. About the reflection. I checked after. You were right. They had me dead to rights. If you had waited for authorization, I would be gone. Yara met his eyes. I was not going to let that happen. Vance nodded slowly. Then he did something none of the SEALs had done since she arrived. He extended his hand. Thank you. She shook it. The grip was firm. Real. The first crack in a wall had become a door. That night, between engagements, Thorne found her cleaning her rifle by the light of a small fire. He sat down across from her, his face carved with shadows and exhaustion. Theodore Okonkwo, he said, Staff Sergeant. First Marine Scout sniper to make a confirmed kill over 1,200 meters in Vietnam. My instructor when I was younger than you are now. Yara's hands stopped moving. He wrote me when you were born. Wrote me again when you were 10. Said you were natural. Thorne paused, his voice heavy with decades of memory. Wrote me one last time before he died. An explosion echoed somewhere in the valley. Neither of them moved. He asked me to give you a chance, Thorne continued. A real chance. To see what you could do when everything was on the line. Yara looked down at her grandfather's rifle. The wood was warm from her hands, smooth from generations of care. She understood now. All of it. The training. The stories. The notebook full of calculations. It had never been about making her a weapon. It had been about making her ready. Do not waste it. Thorne stood and disappeared into the darkness. Yara finished cleaning her rifle and began preparing for whatever came next. Behind her, 11 enemy fighters lay dead in the mountains. Ahead, the hardest part was still waiting. The second day brought the enemy sniper. He announced himself with a shot that cracked past Kimura's head by inches, forcing the medic flat against the rocks where he had been treating a wounded operator. The round had come from somewhere in the eastern mountains, but the distance and the echo made locating the source impossible. Everyone down, Thorne ordered over the radio. We have a shooter. The team scattered into cover. Yara pressed herself behind her boulder, scanning the ridge lines through her scope. The terrain offered 100 possible positions. 1,000 places where a patient man could hide and wait and kill. A second shot punched through the arm of a SEAL named Torres who had been moving toward better cover. He went down screaming, clutching the wound, exposed in open ground. Kimura started toward him. Kimura, hold. Holt's voice was sharp. You go out there, he will drop you too. The medic froze, caught between training and survival. Torres writhed in the dirt 15 meters away, blood darkening the sand beneath him. We need to locate that shooter, Thorne said. Overwatch positions, report. Holt responded first. Nothing from the north. I cannot find him. Yara swept her scope across the eastern ridge, searching for any sign of the enemy. Muzzle flash. Scope glint. Movement. Anything. But the shooter was good. Better than good. He had chosen his position perfectly, and he was not making mistakes. A third shot kicked dirt a foot from Torres's head. The wounded SEAL tried to crawl toward cover, but the movement only drew another round that tore through his pack. "He is playing with him," Vance said over the radio. "Keeping him pinned so he cannot move." Yara forced herself to think past the chaos. The shots were coming from the east. The angles suggested elevation, significant elevation. The time between shots was consistent, suggesting a bolt-action rifle and a shooter who was not rushing. She closed her eyes and visualized the terrain map she had memorized. There, a rock formation at approximately 1,100 meters. It matched the angle. It matched the timing. It matched everything except certainty. Overwatch 3 to all call signs. Possible shooter position, Eastern Ridge, grid reference follows. Rock formation approximately 1,100 meters. I cannot confirm visual. Negative, Overwatch 3. Holt's voice cut through. I have been looking at that position. There is nothing there. Yara opened her grandfather's notebook in her mind, flipping through pages of lessons she had memorized years ago. When you cannot see the shooter, see what the shooter sees. Reverse the geometry. Find where he must be, not where he might be. She looked at Torres, then at Kimura's position, then at where the first shot had nearly hit the medic. 3 data points. 3 angles. She calculated backward, tracing invisible lines through the air until they converged on a single point. The rock formation, but not on top of it, behind it, using the shadow to mask his position. He is there, Yara said. Behind a formation, not on it, using the shadow for concealment. I need a distraction to confirm. Holt's response was immediate. We are not risking anyone on your guess. Silence stretched across the radio. Torres had stopped moving, either from blood loss or smart decision-making. Either way, time was running out. I will do it. Vance's voice surprised everyone, including Yara. I will move to a secondary position, draw a shot. You tell me if you see anything. Vance, negative. Holt's command was absolute. Stand down. With respect, Senior Chief, Torres is bleeding out, and we are not getting anywhere sitting here. Vance paused. She has been right about everything so far. The radio went silent. Yara could hear her own heartbeat in her ears, counting seconds that Torres might not have. Do it, Thorne ordered. Vance controlled exposure. Okonkwo, you have one chance. Do not miss. Vance moved from cover with the calculated recklessness of a man who trusted his training more than his fear. He exposed himself for exactly half a second, a blur of movement between 2 boulders. The enemy sniper fired. Yara saw it, not the shooter himself, but the disturbance. A shift in the shadow behind the rock formation. The faintest displacement of dust from a muzzle blast. It was barely anything. It was enough. I have him, she said. 11-20 meters. Behind the formation, left side. He is using a crack in the rock as a natural loophole. She did not wait for authorization. Her grandfather's voice filled her head. When a shot is there, take the shot. Hesitation kills. She fired. The round crossed the valley in just over a second. Through her scope, she watched the shadow behind the rock formation jerk and go still. No more movement. No more shots. Target down, she reported. Confirmed. The valley held its breath for a long moment. Then Kimura broke from cover and sprinted to Torres, sliding into position beside the wounded SEAL with his medical kit already open. The team began moving again, covering angles, establishing security. Vance appeared at Yara's position minutes later, breathing hard from the climb. He did not say anything at first, just looked at her with an expression that had traveled a long distance from where it started. That was 1,120 meters, he said finally, through a crack in a rock formation. Based on shadow displacement, Yara ejected her spent casing and chambered a fresh round. My grandfather made a shot like that once. Except his was at night. With iron sights. Vance shook his head slowly, something like wonder in his eyes. Who the hell was your grandfather? The best, Yara said simply. He was the best. Below them, Kimura had stabilized Torres. The team was moving again, pushing toward their objective. The enemy sniper who had pinned them down was dead, his perfect position turned into his grave by an 18-year-old girl with a 50-year-old rifle. Vance settled into position beside her, pulling out his spotting scope. For the first time, They occupy the same space as equals. Sniper and spotter. Partners. I will call wind, he said. You shoot. Yara nodded. Copy. The partnership had begun, and somewhere in the mountains ahead, more enemies were waiting to learn what the first one had learned too late. The kid could shoot. The extraction point was supposed to be safe. Intelligence had promised a quiet landing zone 2 kilometers north of the village, sheltered by terrain and far from known enemy positions. Intelligence had been wrong. The team reached the secondary position as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the western peaks. Torres was stable but immobile, his wounded arm splinted and bandaged, his face pale from blood loss. Kimura stayed close to him, monitoring vitals, rationing the medical supplies that were running lower than anyone wanted to admit. Thorn gathered the team in a tight perimeter, his expression carved from the same stone as the mountains around them. New intelligence from command. Enemy reinforcements moving into the valley from the south. Estimated strength is 40 to 60 fighters. They know we are here, and they are coming. The numbers settled over the team like a weight. 12 Americans against 50 potential enemies. In terrain, the enemy knew better. With wounded who could not move fast. What about extraction? Holt asked. Delayed. Thorn's voice was flat. Weather is moving in from the north. Helicopters cannot fly until morning at the earliest. We hold here until dawn. No one spoke. The mathematics were brutal, and everyone could do them. 12 hours of darkness. 50 enemies closing in. A position that offered cover but limited escape routes. This was how operations went wrong. This was how names ended up on memorial walls. We need eyes on the southern approach, Thorn continued. High ground. Someone who can see them coming and slow them down before they reach our perimeter. He did not look at anyone specifically, but everyone understood what he was asking. The observation post he meant was a rock outcropping 200 meters above their position. Exposed. Isolated. The first place the enemy would target when the shooting started. I will take it. Yara's voice cut through the silence. The SEALs turned to look at her, their expressions ranging from surprise to something that might have been respect. Holt stepped forward. That position is a death trap. One shooter up there against 50 fighters coming up the valley. He shook his head. It is suicide. It is overwatch, Yara replied. Elevation advantage. Clear sight lines. Compressed approach that limits their avenues of attack. She met Holt's eyes without flinching. I can hold them. Long enough for the rest of you to prepare. The senior chief stared at her for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the armor he had worn since she arrived. He turned to Thorn. She is right about the terrain. If someone is going to be up there, it should be someone who can actually use the range advantage. Thorn nodded slowly. Okonkwo, you have the position. Vance goes with you as spotter. Vance was already gathering his gear. He moved to Yara's side without hesitation, checking his equipment, his movements efficient and purposeful. The partnership forged in the morning's firefight had become something solid, something real. The climb to the observation post took 30 minutes of careful movement through terrain that grew steeper with every step. The sun was touching the western peaks when they reached the outcropping, painting the valley below in shades of orange and red. It would have been beautiful under different circumstances. Yara settled into position behind a natural rock barrier, her rifle extending over the edge toward the southern approach. Vance set up beside her with his spotting scope, already scanning the terrain. Fields of fire are good, he said quietly. We can see them coming from at least 800 meters out. Maybe more once the moon rises. Yara checked her ammunition. 17 rounds in the magazine. 3 magazines total. 51 chances to keep the team alive through the night. The temperature began to drop as darkness crept across the valley. Stars emerged one by one, cold and distant, indifferent to what was about to happen below them. Yara pulled her grandfather's notebook from her pack and opened it to a page she had read 100 times. Night shooting, her grandfather had written. The fundamentals do not change. Breathing, trigger control, follow through. What changes is your relationship with uncertainty. You cannot see everything. You must trust what you know. She closed the notebook and tucked it back into her pack. Vance glanced at her. Would he write about situations like this? Yara almost smiled. He wrote that the darkness is not your enemy. It is the same for everyone. The question is who adapts faster. And who shoots better, Vance added. That too. The radio crackled. Thorne's voice was calm but tight. All positions, report status. The team checked in one by one. Perimeter secure. Fields of fire established. Everyone ready for what was coming. When Yara's turn came, her voice was steady. Overwatch established. Southern approach covered. Copy, Overwatch. Thorne paused. Good luck up there. The waiting began. Minutes stretched into hours. The cold deepened, seeping through clothing and into bones. Yara stayed motionless behind her rifle, her eye pressed to the scope, scanning the darkness for movement that she knew would come. Vance spotted them first. Movement. Southern Ridge. Multiple signatures. Yara shifted her scope. There. Shapes moving through the darkness, barely visible against the rocks. 1, 5, 10. More than she could count quickly, spreading across the valley floor like water finding its way downhill. She keyed her radio, speaking words that would define everything that came next. Contact. Multiple hostiles. They are coming. Below her, 50 enemy fighters began their advance toward 12 Americans who stood between them and the dawn. Above them, Yara Okonkwo placed her finger on the trigger and began to breathe. The first shot split the darkness at 0217. Yara watched through her scope as the lead fighter dropped without a sound, his body folding into the rocks 800 meters below. The men behind him froze, searching for the source of death that had come from nowhere. She gave them 2 seconds of confusion before she fired again. The second fighter spun and fell. The third tried to run and made it 4 steps. The fourth dove behind a boulder that was not large enough to hide him completely. For rounds. For kills. The enemies scattered like startled birds, abandoning their careful advance for desperate cover. Vance called targets with quiet precision. 2 more at your 10 o'clock, moving behind the wall. Range 850. Yara adjusted. Fired twice. 2 more bodies. The radio erupted with chatter from below. The main element was engaging fighters who had tried to flank the perimeter. Gunfire echoed through the valley, muzzle flashes blinking like angry stars. But the bulk of the enemy force was still in front of Yara, still trying to push up the southern approach, still dying every time they moved. She lost track of time. The night became a series of moments measured in trigger pulls and confirmed kills. Her grandfather's training took over completely, muscle memory and instinct merging into something that felt less like shooting and more like breathing. Find the target. Calculate the wind. Squeeze. Follow through. Find the next target. Vance kept pace beside her, his voice steady despite the chaos below. 900 meters, 2 fighters crossing open ground. Adjust for the wind shift. 1,000 meters, machine gun team setting up. Priority target. She engaged each one. The machine gun team died before they could fire a single burst. A group trying to establish a mortar position never got their first round in the tube. An enemy leader shouting orders from behind a truck discovered that cover only works if the shooter cannot see around it. By 0400, her first magazine was empty. 17 rounds. 15 confirmed kills. She reloaded without looking, her hands performing the action automatically while her eyes stayed pressed to the scope. The enemy had learned to fear the southern approach. Their advance had stalled, fighters unwilling to cross ground that had become a killing field. But they were adapting. She could see them regrouping in the distance, massing for a concentrated push that would overwhelm her position through sheer numbers. They're getting ready for a rush, Vance observed. Looks like 20 plus. Yara calculated. 20 fighters. 34 rounds remaining. If they came all at once, spreading across multiple angles, she cannot stop them all. Some would get through. Some would reach the team below. She opened her grandfather's notebook, turning to a page near the back. The handwriting was shakier there, written in the final months of his life. One of his last lessons. When you are outnumbered, do not try to kill them all. Kill the one who matters. Remove the head, and the body loses direction. Find the leader. End the leader. Everything else follows. Yara closed the notebook and began scanning for the enemy commander. She found him at 0523, just as the first gray light began to touch the eastern horizon. He stood on a ridgeline 1,400 meters away, using binoculars to coordinate his forces. Even at that distance, she could see the way the other fighters deferred to him, the way they waited for his signals before moving. He was the brain of the operation. Without him, the attack would collapse into chaos. 1,400 meters. Her farthest confirmed kill had been 1,203. On a range. In perfect conditions. This was combat. Exhaustion. Cold. Wind that had been shifting all night. I see him, Vance said quietly. 1,400 plus. That is beyond maximum effective range. Yara did not respond. She was already calculating. Wind from a northeast at approximately 8 knots. Temperature drop affecting air density. Elevation difference of nearly 300 meters. Her grandfather's formulas ran through her head, adjusting for variables he had taught her to read like a language. That is impossible, Vance said. Not a criticism, just a fact. Yara made her final adjustments. Her crosshairs settled on the enemy commander's chest. At this distance, she could not see his face clearly. Could not know if he had a family waiting for him somewhere. Could not know anything about him except that he was trying to kill 12 Americans and she was the only thing standing in his way. My grandfather made a shot like this once, she said softly. 1,340 meters. Vietnam, with a rifle that was old when he was young. She exhaled slowly, letting her heartbeat settle into the space between moments. He told me the distance does not matter, only the decision. Vance watched through his spotting scope, holding his breath. The sun crested the eastern mountains, spilling golden light across the valley. The enemy commander raised his hand, preparing to signal the final assault. Yara squeezed the trigger. The round left the barrel at 2,800 feet per second. It climbed through the cold morning air, riding the wind she had calculated, dropping along the arc she had predicted. 1 second, 2 seconds, nearly 3 seconds of flight time across a distance that most shooters would never attempt. The enemy commander dropped. Through a scope, Yara watched his body crumple, watched the fighters around him freeze in confusion, watched the coordinated assault dissolve into chaos as men who had been ready to die suddenly realized no one was telling them where to go. Target down, Vance breathed. 1,412 meters. Confirmed kill. The enemy broke. Without their leader, the attack collapsed. Fighters scattered into the mountains, abandoning the assault, leaving their dead behind. The valley fell silent, except for the distant sound of helicopter rotors finally cutting through the morning air. Yara lowered her rifle and allowed herself to breathe. 17 confirmed kills through the night. 18 with the commander. Ranges from 800 to 1,412 meters. In darkness. In combat. Under conditions that would have broken most shooters she had ever met. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory one final time. The bullet does not care how young you are, only how steady. She had been steady enough. The helicopters touched down in a storm of dust and rotor wash. Yara descended from the observation post on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else, the exhaustion finally catching up to her now that the shooting had stopped. Vance walked beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, a silent acknowledgement of everything they had survived together. The team gathered at the extraction point, faces gray with fatigue and covered in the grime of 2 days of combat. Torres was loaded onto the first helicopter, Kimura staying beside him, already coordinating with the flight medic. The others formed a loose perimeter, weapons still ready, eyes still scanning the ridge lines out of habit. Holt stood apart from the group, watching Yara approach. His expression was unreadable, carved from the same stone that had greeted her at FOB Resolute 5 days ago. But something in his posture had changed. The hostility that had radiated from him like heat was gone, replaced by something quieter, something that looked almost like uncertainty. Yara stopped in front of him. Neither spoke for a long moment. 1,412 meters. Holt's voice was rough, stripped of its usual mockery. I have been shooting for 20 years. Trained with the best snipers in the world. Competed against operators from 6 different countries. He shook his head slowly. I cannot have made that shot. Not at that range. Not under those conditions. Not in my best moment on my best day. Yara said nothing. There was nothing to say. I was wrong about you. The words came out like they cost him something. Wrong about everything. He paused, his jaw working. That attachment who froze, the one who almost got Vance killed. I have been carrying that for 8 months. Using it as an excuse to push away anyone who was not already part of the team. He met her eyes. You are not him. You are not anything like him. I know, Yara replied quietly. Holt almost smiled. Something that might have been respect flickered across his face. Yeah, I guess you do. He extended his hand. Yara took it. The grip was firm, calloused, the handshake of a man who had decided something and would not go back on it. The other SEALs had been watching. One by one, they approached. Kimura nodded to her before climbing into the helicopter with Torres. The operator whose name she had never learned, the one who had bet she could not hit anything past 600 meters, stopped in front of her and simply said 2 words. Good shooting. Another clapped her on the shoulder as he passed, a gesture of acceptance that said more than any speech could have. Vance was last. He stood beside her as the rotors spun up, the wind whipping around them, making conversation nearly impossible. He leaned close to her ear. I have spotted for a lot of shooters. Good ones. Great ones. He pulled back enough to look at her face. Never anyone like you. Yara allowed herself a small smile. My grandfather would have liked you. Vance grinned. I would have liked him too. They boarded the helicopter together, taking seats across from Holt and the remaining operators. The aircraft lifted off, banking hard over the valley where they had fought and bled and nearly died. Below, the enemy dead lay scattered across the rocks, testimony to what 12 Americans had accomplished against impossible odds. Thorne sat down beside Yara as the helicopter climbed toward cruising altitude. He did not speak immediately, just watched the mountains falling away beneath them. 29 confirmed kills, he said finally, in 48 hours, including one at 1,412 meters that will probably stand as a record for the next decade. He turned to look at her. Your grandfather would be proud. The words hit harder than Yara expected. She felt something loosen in her chest, a knot she had been carrying since the day he died. Since the moment she had promised him she would not waste what he had given her. He knew, she said quietly. Did not he? He knew I would end up here. Thor nodded. Theodore was many things. A warrior, a teacher, a legend in circles most people will never know exist. But more than anything, he was patient. He saw what you could become before you could walk. And he spent 18 years making sure you would be ready when the moment came. Yara looked down at her hands. The same hand her grandfather had guided on her first rifle. The same hands that had just killed 29 men across 2 days of combat. Steady hands. His hands. He wrote me one last letter, Thorne continued. A week before he passed. Asked me to make sure you got your chance. To put you somewhere that would test everything he had taught you. He paused. I did not do this as a favor to a dead friend, Okonkwo. I did it because he was right about you. He was right about everything. The helicopter carried them north, toward the base, toward safety, toward whatever came next. Yara pressed her forehead against the cold window and watched the mountains slide past below. Somewhere down there, the valley where she had proven herself was already fading into distance and memory. But what she had done there would not fade. The SEALs who had mocked her arrival would carry her story with them. The enemy who had underestimated her would never underestimate anyone again. And the grandfather who had believed in her before she believed in herself would finally rest knowing his legacy was secure. She touched her pocket where his photograph waited, worn from years of handling. I did it, she whispered, too quiet for anyone else to hear. I did what you bill me to do. Outside the window, the sun climbed higher over Afghanistan, burning away the shadows of the night, illuminating a world that looked exactly the same as it had 2 days ago. But Yara Okonkwo was not the same. She never would be again. FOB Resolute looked different when the helicopter touched down. The same dusty compound, The same concrete barriers and plywood buildings. The same mountains rising in the distance. But Yara saw it through different eyes now. Eyes that had watched men die through a rifle scope. Eyes that had stared down impossible odds and refused to blink. The debrief lasted 3 hours. Thorne led it, walking through every engagement with methodical precision. Maps covered the walls, marked with positions and distances and kill confirmations. Intelligence officers took notes. A Colonel Yara had never seen before sat in the corner, watching without speaking, his expression giving away nothing. When Thorne reached the final engagement, the 1,412-meter shot on the enemy commander, the room went silent. The colonel leaned forward. "You were telling me an 18-year-old Army private made a shot at that range," he said, "under combat conditions, after being awake for over 30 hours. "Yes, sir," Thorne replied. "I am telling you exactly that." The colonel looked at Yara for a long moment. She met his gaze without flinching. Whatever he was looking for, he seemed to find it. "Carry on," he said, settling back in his chair. The debrief concluded with commendations. Torres was stable and would keep his arm. No American fatalities. Enemy casualties confirmed at 43, with 29 attributed to a single shooter. The numbers hung in the air like something holy. Afterward, Yara found herself alone in the Army barracks for the first time since the mission began. She sat on her bunk, her grandfather's rifle across her knees, and allowed herself to feel everything she had been holding back. The fear she had not acknowledged. The doubt she had refused to show. The grief that had been waiting patiently beneath the surface since the letter from her mother arrived. She pulled the letter from her pocket and read it again. "Tomorrow is the anniversary. 2 years since your grandfather passed." The words blurred as her eyes filled with tears she had not permitted herself to shed. From beneath her pillow, she retrieved an envelope she had not opened. It had arrived with her transfer orders, addressed in Thorne's handwriting, with instructions not to read it until the mission was complete. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded around a photograph. The photograph showed 2 young men in military uniforms, standing beside a rifle range somewhere tropical. One was clearly Thorne, decades younger, lean and eager. The other was her grandfather, his eyes carrying the same steadiness that lived in hers. The letter was in her grandfather's handwriting. Shaky, faded, written in the final days of his life. "My dearest Yara," it began, "if you are reading this, then Elias has kept his promise. You have faced your test. You have proven what I always knew you would prove. Not to them, to yourself. I'm sorry I cannot be there to see it. Sorry I will not be there for everything that comes after. But I want you to know that I have never doubted you. Not for a single moment. From the day you were born, I saw something in your eyes. The same thing my instructors saw in mine. The patience to wait. The courage to act. The steadiness to do what must be done when others cannot." The tears fell freely now, dropping onto the paper, smudging ink that was already faded. "I have given you everything I know. Every lesson. Every technique. Every hard truth about what it means to carry this burden. The rest is yours to discover. Your own shots to take. Your own legacy to build. Remember what I taught you. The bullet does not care how young you are, only how steady. And you, my girl, have always been the steadiest person I have ever known. I love you. I am proud of you. And wherever I am now, I am watching. Your grandfather, Theodore." Yara pressed the letter against her chest and let herself cry. Not the quiet tears of grief she had allowed herself before. Real tears. The kind that came from finally understanding that you have become what someone believed you could be. A knock at the door interrupted her. She wiped her face quickly, composing herself before answering. The entire SEAL team stood outside. Holt at the front, Vance beside him, Kimura, Torres, his arm in a sling, but his feet steady. Every operator who had mocked her arrival, who had doubted her ability, who had watched her prove them wrong. Holt held something in his hand. A challenge coin, bronze, bearing the SEAL trident. "This does not make you a SEAL," he said. His voice was formal, but his eyes were warm. "But it means you have earned respect from men who do not give it easily." He pressed the coin into her palm. "From all of us." Yara looked at the coin, then at the faces surrounding her. Warriors who had seen her at her best, who had fought beside her, who would carry her story with them for the rest of their careers. My grandfather used to say that respect is not given, she said quietly. It is witnessed. She slipped the coin into her pocket, beside the photograph and the letter and everything else she carried. Thank you for witnessing. Holt nodded once. The team dispersed slowly, returning to their routines, leaving Yara alone with the weight of everything she had earned. She sat back down on her bunk and opened her grandfather's notebook to the last page. Blank. Waiting. She picked up a pen and began to write. Confirmed kill. 1,412 meters. Karangal Valley, Afghanistan. Below that, she added 3 more words. For you, Grandpa. The morning of her departure arrived too quickly and not quickly enough. Yara packed her gear with the same methodical precision she brought to everything, each item finding its place in her rucksack like pieces of a puzzle she had solved long ago. The rifle case went last, handled with reverence, its weight familiar and comforting against her shoulder. Outside the barracks, FOB Resolute hummed with its usual activity. Convoys preparing for patrol. Soldiers moving between buildings. The ordinary rhythm of a base at war. But for Yara, nothing about this place would ever be ordinary again. Vance found her first. He leaned against the concrete barrier outside her door, arms crossed, a half-smile on his face. Heading out without saying goodbye, Yara set down her gear. I was coming to find you. Sure you were. He pushed off the wall and closed the distance between them. I talked to Thorne. Put in a request to have you assigned to our team permanently. He paused. If you want it. The offer hung in the air. A place among the best. A home among warriors who had seen what she could do. I want it, Yara said. But not yet. I have things to learn first. Training to complete. She met his eyes. When I come back, I want to earn my place. Not have it given because of one operation. Vance nodded slowly, something like admiration in his expression. Your grandfather teach you that too? He taught me everything. Vance extended his hand. She took it, and he pulled her into a brief embrace. The kind of hug soldiers give each other when words are not enough. Do not take too long, he said as he stepped back. I am not getting any younger, and good spotters are hard to find. Yara almost smiled. I will find you. He walked away without looking back. Yara watched him go, memorizing the moment, filing it away with everything else she would carry from this place. The farewells continued throughout the morning. Kimura stopped by with a medical kit, compact and professional grade, insisting she take it. Torres appeared despite being ordered to rest, his good arm pulling her into a one-armed hug that nearly lifted her off her feet. Even the operators whose names she had never learned found reasons to cross her path, nodding or offering brief words that meant more than longer speeches could have. Holt was waiting at the motor pool where a transport idled. He stood with his arms crossed, watching her approach with an expression that had traveled light years from where it started. Okonkwo, Senior Chief. They faced each other in the morning sun, 2 shooters separated by 20 years and a gulf of experience that had somehow closed over the course of 5 days. I've been doing this a long time, Holt said. Seen a lot of operators come through. Good ones. Great ones. A few legends. He paused. You're going to be one of the legends. Not because of what you did here. Because of what you were going to do next. Yara did not know how to respond. She settled for the truth. I had good teachers. Holt almost smiled. Yeah, you did. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Thorne asked me to give you this. Say it belonged to you now. Yara unfolded the paper. Her grandfather's handwriting stared back at her, faded but unmistakable. A letter addressed to Elias Thorne, dated 20 years ago. I am writing to ask a favor, it began. Not for me. For someone who does not exist yet. My daughter is expecting a child. A girl. And I have a feeling about this one, Elias. The same feeling I had about you when you showed up at my range all those years ago. Yara's throat tightened as she read. When the time comes, give her a chance. A real chance. Put her somewhere that will test her. Let her prove what she is made of. And if she fails, let her fail on her own terms. But I do not think she will fail. I think she will surprise everyone. Everyone except me. The letter was signed with her grandfather's name and a single line beneath it. She will be ready. I will make sure of it. Yara folded the letter carefully and slipped it into her pocket beside the challenge coin and the photograph and everything else she carried. Thank you, she said to Holt. For everything. He nodded once. Go be a legend, Okonkwo. We will be watching. She climbed into the transport and did not look back. 1 year later, at a different base in a different desert, Yara watched a nervous private miss the target at 400 meters. The other soldiers laughed, the same sharp sound she remembered from her own arrival at FOB Resolute. The same dismissal, the same assumption. She stepped forward, her voice cutting through the noise. Again, the private tried. Missed. Again. Third shot clipped the edge of the target. Better. Yara moved beside him, adjusting his grip the way her grandfather had adjusted hers a lifetime ago. Her hands guided his, patient and precise. The bullet does not care how new you are, she said quietly. Only how steady. The private took a breath, steadied himself, fired. Center mass. Yara allowed herself a small smile that nobody saw. The same smile her grandfather used to wear when she made a shot he knew she could make all along. In her pocket, 2 challenge coins sat beside a worn photograph and letters written by hands that would never hold a rifle again. In her quarters, a notebook held calculations in 2 different handwritings, 2 generations of shooters bound together by ink and legacy and love. At 1,412 meters, her grandfather's legacy and her own story had become the same thing. Not because of the distance, not because of the kills, not because of the records that would stand for years, because of what she was willing to carry and what she was willing to pass on. The private looked at her with something like hope in his eyes. Yara saw herself in that expression, saw her grandfather in her own response. Again, she said, and the teaching continued. If this story stayed with you, drop a comment and tell us your favorite moment or character. Maybe you know someone who was underestimated until they had a chance to prove themselves. Or maybe you have been that person yourself. Share your story with us.